Hi folks, it's Gary here, and it's a very warm welcome back to the fourth official for the latest in our new season preview shows. Joining me on this one is an old friend of the fourth official, back once again to talk all things Hearts from the Scarves Around the Funnel podcast. It's Scott McIntosh. Scott, how are we?
Yeah, not too bad, guys. Thanks very much for having me back on, and hopefully I'm in a more positive frame of mind than the last time I was on a couple of months ago.
Yes, well, certainly the last time Scott was with us was just after Neil Critchley had been dismissed as Hearts manager, and we're obviously talking at that point about how last season that had gone for Hearts. We've obviously gone through the pre-season now, or in the middle of kind of pre-season training at the moment, with the League Cup kicking off this weekend. For all the teams in Scotland that are not involved in European football next season. Hearts obviously a new manager, our head coach, and Derek Mcinnes will maybe talk about job titles in a wee while, Scott. But when we were talking a couple of months ago, when the link to Derek McInnes first kind of surfaced, and at that point it seemed as if it was a logical move, but maybe not one that kind of tied in with potentially where Hearts were looking to go. But they went there. Obviously, last game of the season was against Kilmarnock, and there was that kind of awkwardness of Derek not being allowed in the building, so to speak, for it. But over the course of the summer, how are things kind of shaping up from a Gorgie perspective? Not been massively busy in terms of new players in the door as of yet at time of recording. A couple of bodies, particularly Kibangu, with his kind of loan being made permanent. But there's a few bodies in, but not the kind of big wave of new signings that potentially we thought there might have been.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a balancing act just now. So we've brought in around sort of 5 or 6 players. Naturally, there's been the re-signing of Lauren Shankland, which in itself sort of feels a little bit like a new signing as well. We're now left with a squad of around 30 to 32 players. So there is a little bit of trimming that needs to be done, I think, before we go back into the market. We do have 2 new players that are pretty much over the line. There's just a little bit of red tape, sort of getting in the way of those 2 signings being confirmed, but they've been over to get their, scarves above the head sort of signings and photos taken over the last day or two. I think Derek McInnes has been very keen to stress that the squad does need trimmed down by a number of players. There was a sort of Q&A with him just a few days ago where he made that point on 2 or 3 separate occasions to get that point across. I think he's been left with very much top heavy sort of numbers in various positions. So that's probably going to be his priority now. I would say over the next couple of weeks, we'd be trying to shift some players out the door, whether that's permanently or on loan. It's difficult to say. I think the problem that Hearts have, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, guys, giving your allegiances to Rangers, but sometimes if you support a team of a certain size and you get players who come along, you sometimes get a feeling that they know themselves that their next move can potentially be on a downward trajectory, and it can be very hard to move them on, not just because they're not wanting to move to maybe say a smaller club, but it's more the financial sort of hit that such a move can take. So sometimes I feel like, when clubs, either Rangers or Celtic level, but a level down with Hearts, Hibs and Aberdeen, when you find certain players like that you're trying to move on, it can become difficult because they know themselves in terms of wage cuts. They could be taking upwards of a 50% cut if they want to move on. So that's going to be the tricky part now for McInnes to try and negotiate over the next few weeks, I think.
Yeah, talking about outgoings, player of the season last year, James Penrice has gone to AK Athens. The lure of playing alongside Cyril Dessers next season was too much for young James. Although that deal's still to get completed, but he leaves a big hole behind in terms of what he was for Hearts last season, in terms of he was one of the main shining lights from what was a disappointing season. So he'll take a little bit of replacement, but we were hoping that Stephen Kingsley might be a bit more fit and a bit more available this year, that might be able to slot in into that position.
Yeah, I think just now Harry Milne will probably take the mantle for the time being. It's a position I would like to see a strengthening. I think Stephen Kingsley's days as a left back are pretty numbered now. He's struggling in terms of pace and mobility. He's probably one of the names I think could be out the door. But again, as I alluded to earlier, it could be difficult to shift him off the books due to the wages on at Hearts and what he's likely to get elsewhere. Penrice will be a miss. I think the deal was a good deal, though. It was a good deal for him. I think he's at least tripled his wages, and given how short a career is for a footballer, I can't begrudge anyone wanting to move. And I think now there's an appetite for Scottish players to ply their trade abroad as well and sort of try their hand there. I think there used to be a time around sort of 15, 20 years ago, you saw the odd case of it and it didn't quite work out, whereas now it's becoming more of a common theme. So I hope the move goes well for him. He'll have European football now, he'll have a bit more exposure, and hopefully he can maybe get another move on top of that, because I do hear we've got a decent sort of sell-on clause in the deal. So here's hoping he gets another good 12 months there and he might move on afterwards. But yeah, the left back position's possibly one I'd like to see us strengthen. And I would say we've added a lot of pace and physicality to the rest of the squad, but I would say the full back positions still lack a little bit of mobility and pace in there. And there's a little bit of concern that if we want to suffocate teams the way that McInnes has been talking about, you do leave yourself open to the counter-attack. And most teams in Scotland like playing that way now. You know, a lot of teams in Scotland are coached without the ball rather than with it. St Mirren are a good example of that. Aberdeen are another. Hibs to a degree as well. So I think that's something they'll need to watch out for. But because there's so many changes needed this summer, I'm not sure he'll be able to do it all in one transfer window. It's maybe something we'll need to be a bit patient about.
Yeah, another couple of bodies that have gone out, the likes of George Grant, who's now down at Salford. Barry Mackay's gone off the books as well now, as we were speaking on one of our previous shows with David from a Livingston perspective. And Macaulay Kate back at Livingston for another season's loan there. Lewis Nielsen's gone to Falkirk on a season loan. But probably, as you mentioned at the start of the show, retaining Lauren Shankland seems an important bit of business from a Hearts perspective. As much as last season wasn't great for Lauren Shankland as a player, he's very much is that kind of beating heart of that Hearts side, even if he's maybe not quite the number 9 now that he once was. The fact that he's still club captain, the fact that he's committed to staying at Hearts, is that down to there being not the interest in terms of the move that he wanted to make, or is it that he's now realised that Hearts is probably where he should be at for the rest of his career now?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors involved in this. I think firstly, there wasn't the interest within Britain that I think he was needing. He's got a young family, and I do think there was one or two offers from abroad. I think there was one particularly strong offer in China and another one in Turkey. But I don't think he ever really entertained that because it just wouldn't have suited his young family to have made that move, even although financially it probably would have made more sense to try and get a 2 or 3 year contract there.
Yeah.
I
Struggled in
think,
Belgium, so you can maybe
yeah,
understand that kind of reticence to go abroad again. So
exactly. And I think he's tried to sit on it as long as he possibly could. I think he was generally quite happy with the terms that Hearts had agreed with him. There was issues, though, with the agent fee that was sort of causing a bit of an issue. And I think if Derek Mcinnes hadn't come in, I think he maybe would have taken the gamble and went abroad. I think McInnes is coming, and McInnes has made it very clear that Shankland is pivotal to the plans that he has for the club over the next couple of years. Neil Critchley, I don't think would have made too much of an overture to try and keep him. I think Critchley had a certain system in mind that Lawrence Shankland was not fitting into, and he was almost trying to shoehorn him into it by playing him as a bit of a sort of deep 9 or a sort of a false 9, a number 10, so to speak, which is fine. Lawrence Shankland has shown that he is capable of playing in that pocket and sort of dropping deep in certain matches. It certainly is beneficial to us, but I think over the course of a full season, you want him to be playing predominantly as a number 9. He still managed to actually get 19 goal involvements last season, which isn't bad. I think naturally, he didn't reach the heights of the year before, but I think even he would admit that he was outperforming any sort of metric that there is in terms of what he should have been hitting 2 seasons back. So I think last year was maybe a bit closer to where he probably should be as a player. I think round about maybe, getting somewhere between 10 and 20 goals and just being generally involved in the team as well. And I think that's what McInnes will want from him. He'll probably play as part of a front two more often under McInnes as well. Although I think there'll be a few changes between back four and back three with McInnes. I think up top he will try and predominantly go with a front pairing, and I think Shankland will be heavily involved in that. So, like I said earlier, it does feel like a new sign. I think a lot of us didn't think we'd get over the line because of the sort of disparity between what we were willing to offer the agent and what the agent was wanting in terms of their signing on fee. It was quite a big gap at one stage, but I think it got to a stage where eventually even they had to admit defeat and they weren't going to get Lawrence the move that I think they probably were promising him 18 months ago. I think they probably felt when he was offered an even better contract than he's ended up with now, I think there was still a lot. They probably felt they had a stronger hand then because of the Scotland call-ups, the 30 goals, and he was slightly younger at that age as well. I think they felt they could have got him that move, but now I think it's become more and more apparent that clubs just weren't willing to take that punt on him, probably due to his lack of pace more than anything else. I know there's always been talk about Rangers, but ultimately Rangers are in the process of trying to get Cyril Dessers out the door. Cyril Dessers is basically an upmarket version of Lauren Shankland, a very good goal scorer, but maybe doesn't quite have the pace to lead the line for Rangers in certain matches. And I think Lauren Shankland would have represented a similar problem for Rangers. He maybe would have finished maybe a few more the chances that Cyril has had. But yeah, I don't think Shankland was ever going to be the answer for Rangers, but unfortunately that was a rumour that just didn't seem to go away.
No, and I think
But
that
yeah,
being the Rangers fan that he supposedly is, that it's a very easy link for newspapers to make, and
it is.
it's lazy journalism, and it was always bubbling under it in the background. But I think it's the type of thing that if there'd been interest from him properly from Rangers, it'd have been done by now. And the
Yes,
fact that
yes.
3 years down the line it's still not happened suggests that if it was going to happen, it would have been maybe 18 months ago when Michael Beale was there, for example. But
Yeah,
certainly
he
not
wouldn't have
now.
been
So
he wouldn't have been difficult to deal with, but I think the paper talk was always instigated by I think there was an interest in him from people within Rangers at board level, but I don't think Philip Clement ever had any interest in him at all because of what I'd mentioned before. I think Clement was needing someone with a bit more pace and mobility to sort of complement Dessers rather than bring along someone who was a bit of a carbon copy of what Dessers can offer. But I think Keith Jackson has certain friends at Ibrox that he was quite happy to sort of punt that story out for because
yeah,
that seemed to be the only source that you were ever hearing, and I
absolutely.
never sort
Yeah,
of put too much stock into it.
no, that's people shouldn't when it's Keith Jackson involved. But I digress. I digress. One thing we've spoken about certainly in the past, Scott, is the Tony Bloom investment into Hearts, and obviously that was confirmed over the course of the summer. He's been very vocal over the summer in terms of his hopes and dreams for Hearts, in terms of upsetting the status quo in Scotland and getting involved at the top end of the table. How realistic is it? Obviously, we've seen Ewan Cameron do what Ewan Cameron does and promising a Hearts title win within the next 5 years. We'll have Ewan on here, but I think he just likes to noise folk up and gain a reaction. But is there that much optimism, I think, from a Hearts perspective, that Tony Bloom's investment, even at this stage, is what's needed to bring Hearts up a level to be a strong third force in Scottish football?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, if you look at his track record everywhere else, he seems to have that Midas touch. But I think if there's one thing we can all agree on, regardless of which club we support in Scotland, is if something can go wrong, it would go wrong in Scotland, and that's where it would fail. So I think there is that little tiny bit of pessimism because of that, but there's no real substance in that. That's just a general vibe that you get because of what you've seen happen before, whether it be certain players or managers who have came up here and thought that they were going to have an easy time of it and they didn't. It's happened. So I think that's why there's always going to be that tingy, just little bit of pessimism when it comes to discussing them. But I think long term, it can be a big benefit to Hearts, and I think that's what the Hearts fans need to have a little bit of patience around. I think obviously the timing of him coming in is just off the back of Union Saint Gillois winning the Belgian title, and they were only, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, they were in the league below when he took over. Now I think what people need to look at is how he not only steadied the ship and then improved the financial situation at that club, but in a very incremental way. So it wasn't a case of he took over and then the following summer they were spending £3, £4, £5 million on a player. When they initially went up, the Jamestown Analytics were actually scouting players from English League Two and League One, and basically just signing players on the cheap. They were maybe only spending a couple of £100,000 here or there during that first season when they were promoted. Now, fast forward 5 years, because of the trading model, they now are in a situation where last summer, I think they spent roughly about 20 million, and they've only just sold someone to Sunderland for 20 million, who they'd only got for Anderlecht on a free transfer 2 years ago, who was only about 17 or 18 at the time. So I think if it was to work, it would need to be something that would need to happen very much in the long term. It would maybe even take longer than 5 years, because although a club like Hearts or Aberdeen or Hibs could come up with a good trading model that could sort of help improve them over a 5-6 year period, I still think Celtic have that huge gap in terms of the finances. They don't always show it, they don't always flex their muscles, because they do hit these periods of complacency when they think they don't need to, and I think they might be doing that again this summer, looking at their transfer activity so far. I'm sure you'll be crossing your fingers that they are, but there does feel like they're going into that cycle of just maybe taking their foot off the gas. But Celtic have always been in that position for the last 10-15 years, where if someone does look like they're going to cause a bit of a challenge, they can sort of, get the open the purse strings come January. So I still think we're very much way off offering that type of a challenge. But I think just now, there isn't a team in Scotland that have cemented third place in the league 2 years running since we done it under Craig Levein over 20 years ago. So I think for me, there's those baby steps that we need to hit first, which is actually consolidate ourselves as a third force before we even start to entertain that conversation about second or heaven forbid going for top of the league. But there's no harm in the ambition, and I'm glad that he's coming out and saying that. But yeah, there just needs to be that bit of realism and patience from the support to acknowledge that it didn't happen overnight at Brighton, and it certainly didn't happen overnight at, over in Belgium as well. So we do need to allow them the chance to get this done.
Yeah, and to be fair, Scottish football fans are renowned for patience, so I'm sure he'll be given it. Obviously, there's that link with USG, and obviously the move for Elton Kabangu has now been made permanent. I think he's a player who, on his day last season, looked brilliant, and on another day looked as if he'd never seen a football before in his life. The fact that he's had now 6 months in Scottish football, do you expect him to be a starter for Hearts every week now, or does the new striker Claudio Bravo, is he ahead of him in the kind of pecking order?
Yeah, I don't think Kabangu's going to be a regular starter at Hearts. So the impression I have, just speaking to people who have got a bit more of a sort of inside knowledge of the club, I think when we signed him in January on that loan, it was more of an obligation rather than an option to buy him at the end of the season. I think the only clause, or the only sort of release clause in it, was in the event of Hearts getting relegated. That's the only sort of event where we didn't have to sign him. So I do think we kind of have been lumbered with him to a degree. He showed a bit of an eye for goal in the beginning. He was hampered by the fact that Neil Critchley then switched to this 4-4-2 diamond, which caused the two forwards in Kabangu and Wilson to have to run the channels more often to give us any width. So that definitely didn't help his game. But what we saw through that change was that he has very limited technical ability and he can't really hold the ball up. And I think what McInnes would be wanting from someone like Kabangu would be a bit more of a foil to the likes of Shankland and Wilson. And I think he's probably realised quickly he's not going to get that. Hence why Braga's came in. We've also got the guy Kabore, who's coming in over from Estonia, who should be signing next week once that red tape issue's been cleared up as well. So I think come the start of the season, he's probably going to find himself fifth in the pecking order. I don't think he'll get many starts unless there's big issues with some of the other players that we've got there. And I think we've been kind of left having to sign him rather than there being a huge appetite from the club.
We've also brought in another forward as well from, I think, a Greek striker, Kizaridis, from a team that I'm not even going to try and attempt to pronounce. But very much not a great deal known about him. Similarly, the big defender, Borja Grevnik, I think. I might have butchered that again, to be fair. But another one who's kind of been plucked out of kind of nowhere that's going to come in. But from the outside, looking at someone like Craig Halkett, who looks shredded but beyond belief and back from fitness, and obviously missed a lot of football last year, but a fit, available Craig Halkett could be a massive asset for Hearts this season, because that soft centre that they seemed to have last year could very much be kind of shored up if Halkett can get a run of fitness behind them.
Yeah, I think continuity is key to the sort of backline at Hearts this season. I think the issue we had last year was that I think we ended up with 17 different centre-half pairings last season, which is just ridiculous. Regardless of the quality of the player, you're not going to get anything, if you're having to constantly chop and change between what's there. So Halkett's a strange one. You'll always hear Hearts fans refer to him as the best player at the club, but there's always that but at the end, when available. And for me, I think sometimes availability is a very underrated skill or sort of source within a player. If he's not available, he's not worth having. And unfortunately for Craig, he's only played just over 100 times for Hearts in a 6-year spell. So he's not even averaging around 20 games a season just now. So I think it's good that we've got other options here. We've got Frankie Kent, we've got Steinvender, we've also got Finlay and McCart there as well. I think there'll be times where Halkett will get used when we switch to a back three, which I think we will do. We will chop and change between a 3 and a 4 at times. And I think if he plays in the middle with the likes of Steinvender and Finlay at either side, I think they can make up for his lack of pace. But I would be a bit concerned with him in a flat back four, again, based on what McInnes is wanting to talk about quite a bit this pre-season so far, about wanting to press teams. From what I know from the closed-door friendlies we've had with East Kilbride and Crawley, it's been very much man-to-man pressing, very much pressing for the front. And I think they'll look to continue that during these League Cup games. So it'll be interesting to see how Halkett deals with that, because it's probably going to rely on us playing a higher line, and that could maybe cause some problems for him in terms of mobility.
The Stuart Finlay, player that Derek Mcinnes knows very, very well from his time at Kilmarnock. Always given the impression of being a very steady player at this level, knows Scottish football obviously inside out, and I don't think there can be any real downside to a player like Stuart Finlay coming in, because he is very steady in terms of just being that continuity. And I've always liked Frankie Kent. I think he's a defender who's got quite a lot of upside, and someone who perhaps has maybe got another level to maybe go in the future, but he's always impressed me whenever I've seen him playing for Hearts.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we're building the squad just now, everyone, including fullbacks, so fullbacks and centre halves, everyone's 6 foot plus. So it very much has the feel of a Derek McInnes squad. And I think when it was announced that he was coming in, I was pretty confident that he would come in and probably be quite happy with some of the options that he had in terms of Frankie Kent and Craig Halkett and McCart as well. I think they're centre halves that you would see in any sort of McInnes side. So I think that's why there's been less sort of turnover in terms of the back line, and most of the changes have been made from middle to top, because pace and physicality were probably the two main things we were missing from our squad over the last sort of year or two.
We've obviously spoke before as well about the goalkeeping situation at Tynecastle. This season will be Craig Gordon's last one, we believe, unless he changes his mind again. But he played probably more last year than possibly Hearts would have wanted to use Craig Gordon at the age of 42. Does Xander Clark come back into the reckoning throughout this season as a kind of nod to thanks for your time, Craig, but we really need to start looking at what the future is beyond Craig Gordon, or do you still see him being the man that plays more than he doesn't this year?
Yeah, last season was a bit of a strange one. From what I was led to believe during the summer, Xander Clark was pretty much picked as Stephen Naismith's first choice. He then only starts a couple of games. He's quickly out the team. Craig Gordon comes back in, and he had a bit of a mixed bag of a season. He was still making those saves that you expect Craig Gordon to make in terms of those incredible reflex saves, sort of point blank. But I did feel there was a few occasions where he was getting beat with shots that, a younger version of Craig Gordon would easily have sort of managed to save. He was also struggling to come off his line, which again was causing problems with the back line. We were losing goals for set plays. For me, I mean, it helps because he's injured just now, so it kind of makes the decision a bit easier for Derek McInnes. But I do think Xander Clark will be the number one this season. But there is there's going to have to be a discussion and a succession plan in place for what we do after this year, because Zander Clark's not getting any younger either. We've got Ryan Fulton there, who is very much a number 3 choice. He isn't someone I would probably want to be number 1 or number 2 at the club. And then we've got a couple of youngsters, Liam McFarlane in particular, who's now went back out on loan to Alla this season. He was at East Fife last year, and he was getting quite a few plaudits for how he performed in League 2. So he's now going to be in League 1. He's sort of making that steady progression. So I think it's going to be looking towards them and having somebody in place maybe for next year, because I do think we're in a situation now where Craig especially should be playing his last year at Hearts, and Zander Clark maybe to a degree doesn't have much longer either.
Maybe potentially see him in the Cups more than in the league.
Possibly. I don't get the impression that Derek McInnes is going to chop and change too much between sort of cup and leagues, because we don't have European football. We do have that sort of luxury, and I get the impression that McInnes probably has this burning desire to try and get some more cup wins under his belt, given that that's probably a stick that he was beat with quite a lot at Aberdeen during his time there, that they had that one solitary League Cup win, but given the sort of situation that Rangers, Hearts and Hibs were all in at various stages during his time at Aberdeen, I think it's pretty much felt that he could have done better with some of those cup runs. So I think there's probably an appetite for him and the club to do better and sort of build on a lot of the sort of semi-final and final runs we've had recently. So I'd be surprised if he makes too many changes, but the man management of the goalkeeper situation will be an interesting one this year, because it's one I never got the feeling that Neil Critchley had the appetite to deal with. I always felt that he looked at certain individuals like Craig Gordon and thought, I'm not dropping him regardless. He just didn't seem to have that man management aspect to him.
And I think that's one thing that McInnes won't be afraid of being able to do, because he's got that kind of aura about him that maybe someone like Critchley or Liam Fox wouldn't have, to be able to make an unpopular decision that from a kind of big figure. And imagine someone like Craig Gordon, the aura of them possibly looms kind of like Callum McGregor was at Rangers in his kind of final season, where he probably went a season longer than he probably should have done. But it's Callum McGregor, so you kind of go, well, he's kind of,
yeah,
to him type thing. So I think maybe see some parallels there.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree. And look, I think when you're a fan, the last thing I think Hearts fans want to see is have that abiding memory. Craig Gordon sort of having this diminished end to his career. You kind of want to remember him in his peak and in his pomp. So I think for me, I'd rather see less of him over the next sort of 12 months and remember him as he was. But I also understand, because of the number of years that he missed in his younger years, why he's probably trying to cling on to this as best as he can. And he's in great general peak health. He's very fit for somebody his age, and I can understand why he's trying to keep going. But yeah, there comes a point where if he doesn't make the decision himself towards the end of the season, then somebody might have to do it for him. And I think finally we do have someone in place that can make that call.
Yeah, from the old stager in the squad to young prospects, and obviously last year was a breakout season for young James Wilson, getting accolades and called up into the Scotland squad at the tail end of the season. He, again, as we mentioned, talking about James Penrice a little bit earlier, Scott, was a big shining light from a disappointing season last year. He can very much kick on, I think, this year as probably the main man up top for Hearts, although, as you mentioned, Shankland is there and there are other options. But how much can James Wilson achieve for Hearts this season?
Well, this should be a better season for him to develop, because there's going to be less a chance of us needing to use him week in, week out. It got to a stage last season, although he came in and done well, you really would have liked to have taken him out the limelight for a few games, but we weren't in the position to do it because Shankland was struggling for form and we didn't really have numbers elsewhere either. Whereas this season, because of the sort of hosty choices that we have, we should be able to sort of take him in and out the squad at our leisure and be able to use him a bit more sparingly. But I think he'll be in match day squads every week. He'll definitely play a number of games. It'll just be interesting what sort of balance and makeup we have with the forward line and what McInnes goes for. With the likes of Braga and Kabori can also play out wide as well, so it might be interesting to see if they get sort of pushed out wide in certain games, and we maybe go up top with Shankland and Wilson in certain matches. Again, it'll just depend on the opposition and the fixture.
Other youngsters as well kicking around at the squad. I think last year, Forrester, the right back, I thought looked very strong whenever I saw him, and I think he's another one that Hearts fans hopefully can hope a lot for in the season ahead.
Yeah, no, I would agree. He came under quite a bit of stick at various stages last season, and I felt that it was quite harsh. You know, we had zero other options than to play Adam Forrester at times, and again, similar to James Wilson, you would have loved the luxury of taking him out and giving him a bit of a rest and sort of just allowing himself to get his confidence back. But he did have a bit of a sort of sticky patch. Came back onto a game towards the end of the season, had a couple of good displays. But again, I think he'll benefit from not having that pressure, feeling as if he needs to play every week and sort of fighting for that sort of right back slot. But I do think he's somebody that could still become a big player for the club. It's maybe not quite as cast iron as James Wilson. I think there's a guarantee with him that he will make us money over the next sort of probably 12 to 18 months. I don't think it'll take long. But with Forrester, he still has a chance as well.
Yep. Last thing before we round things up, Scott, when we spoke last time, we spoke about the potential legacy for Anne Budge, and she had the potential that she was sticking around longer than possibly was going to ruin that potential legacy. It was obviously announced over the summer that she'll be standing down at the end of the year. I know when we've spoken privately and even publicly in the past, that's probably something that you will be quite pleased about. And I think it probably gives Anne Budge the chance to kind of leave on her own terms and try and kind of cement that legacy in a positive manner.
Yeah, I mean, there is an element to me, and again, it could just be the pessimistic side of me where I'll believe it when I see it. I think dropping a title doesn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. She's still going to have a shareholding in the club. She's still going to be on the board. She still will have influence if she decides to exert it on certain individuals. And this has been an issue that Anne Budge has admitted herself. You know, she's said it herself. She's a control freak. So I've still got my doubts that she'll let go. She has started to be fair. So the last couple of managerial appointments that have been made in terms of in terms of Derek Mcinnes and also Neil Critchley, with those decisions, they were made predominantly with Andrew McKinley and Graham Jones sort of heading that process. Prior to that, Anne Budge had said that she was in the background, but I know for a fact she was heavily involved and was the number one force in getting Stephen Naismith the job. So yeah, I think the change in direction and going to McInnes possibly points to there being a change at board level. I think Anne Budge always believed in that sort of Boardroom legacy that Craig Levein tried to install back in 2014. It was pretty much that Liverpool way of have a manager, but also have a succession plan where the next manager's already in the door, so to speak, and he's maybe just along the corridor. I think she believed in that, and I think the fact that we've seen ourselves move away from that over the last 12 months would indicate that she maybe has, released the chains, so to speak, a little bit on other individuals. But yeah, until she's fully out the club, I wouldn't be fully happy. I still think she's had her time, she's done well, but I do believe that having this outside investment from Tony Bloom and having the Jamestown team involved is the way forward for the club.
Minimum expectations for Hearts then this season, Scott. No European football as a distraction this year. So is the goal this year to finish third or to finish above Hibs? Good run in the cups. Is that the aim this year?
Yeah, I think it's about giving a few teams a bloody nose this season, because that's something we failed to do in the big games last season with a really poor record against the top six sides. I think apart from Dundee United, I think we struggled against quite a few of the other teams. Didn't beat Hibs, didn't beat Aberdeen, didn't beat Celtic, didn't beat Rangers. So I think that's something we're hoping to see for a Derek McInnes team will be an improvement in those big matches. I would like to think we can get third and we can have some good cup runs as well. You mentioned yourself, there's no European football to sort of distract us or sort of break that continuity in the squad if we are playing well and picking up results domestically. Hibs and Aberdeen, I, I don't know how long in Europe Hibs are going to be. They've got a really tough playoff game coming up against Midtjylland, who are pretty much a Champions League team in all but name this season. So I think they could struggle to stay in the competition, past sort of August. They've not recruited a lot so far, and again, this could be the maroon tinted glasses on here, but I don't think they were a particularly great side last season. They were an effective side, but I do think if they don't re-sign Nectar Triantis, they're going to have a huge hole in the middle of that field. I do think he carried them at stages last season. Aberdeen have signed a lot of good players on paper, but again, you could have said that 12 months ago and they never quite got the balance right at times. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how that squad shapes up. They're going to be our two biggest sort of challengers, I would imagine. But looking at how our squad is shaping up and having Derek Mcinnes in charge, I am confident we can get third.
As always, here on the Fourth Official, Scott is our man when it comes to all things Hearts across the season. At various points throughout the year, we will have him back on the channel, back on the network, talking about all things Gorgie. But if you can't wait for him to make fleeting appearances here on the Fourth Official, you can find them obviously on the Scarves Around the Funnel podcast. And plans for this season on that channel, just continued coverage or anything new to bring to the table this year?
No, pretty much just the same old, just hopefully a few more positive conversations this year. Yeah, that would be quite nice because last year was a struggle. You had protests, you had boardroom problems, you had managerial changes, derby defeats. So, it was a bit of a slog. I know that there's a bit of a perception that podcasts and that love the drama because that tends to sort of drive up sort of listenership, but I don't think that's always the case. Like we've looked back at some of our viewing figures and sometimes it comes when we're doing well. Not everyone wants to listen to people whinge and moan about things. I just think people believe in that sort of AFTV model. They think that's how everyone operates, but yeah, it would be quite good just to have something positive to discuss next season. I think the league will be interesting as well as a whole. It'll be interesting to Rangers get on. I think the way that Russell Martin wants them to play might take a bit of time to bed in. And obviously, I think there's still probably a few players he'll want to get rid of that are still hanging about there like a bad smell as well. But I do think they can get closer to Celtic this season. Again, might not all be down to what Rangers do. I just have this sneaky feeling that Celtic are just hitting that bit of complacency again. I thought the way they performed in the cup final and towards stages of the end of last season, Rodgers said it himself. He was a bit concerned that some players were just losing that motivation. That can sometimes happen when you're used to winning week in, week out. So I think there's an opportunity there for Rangers to maybe take a little bit of advantage of that, and the league could be a bit closer this season for a change.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I think from the outside looking in, there doesn't appear to be a great deal on paper to separate the likes of Hibs, Hearts and Aberdeen, which I always think makes the league stronger anyway, when you've got more than just a couple of teams that are capable of beating everybody else, because I think no one wants to see a procession and no one wants to see the league over by February. We want to see competitive games. We want to see attacking football. We want to see excitement. We don't want to see 10 men behind the ball and nothing each draws and slug fests. Scottish football, I think, can be a good product. It's not always a good product, but I think on paper there's all the tools there for many teams to have a good season if they want to have one. I think very much the top five look like the top five, and there's quite a distance between them and probably everyone else. So there's, I think, a lot to look forward to this year outside of the Old Firm, and I think hopefully the one thing it will always do is give us talking points. So throughout the season, we'll certainly hear more from Scott from a Hearts perspective. And yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you to you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll speak to you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.